Okay, so hello everybody, this is going to be another deck review, and it is going to be on Odd Rogue this time. And this is a surprising deck, only because for a long time I thought it was terrible. I thought that every time I played it, it was just a free win. And for the most part, when I played Spell Hunter, when I played Odd Paladin, when I played even Zulok, the wins just kept rolling in. And I thought, okay, Face Hunter, Spell Hunter, Paladin, and even Warlock to some extent, although the Warlock wasn't as much of a smash. This deck is terrible. So I decided to try it out, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. This is going to be split up into the three general steps that I usually do. One, overview of the deck, and some things that make it a little bit unique, things I teched in. Two, things that you could potentially tech in because, well, some people don't have all of the cards that I have, or some people just want to tech against certain matchups, so sure. And then the third part is all of the matchups as a whole. So let's just jump right into it. The deck is pretty simple. It has a few things that set it apart, like a Death Speaker and a Plague Scientist. Death Speaker, 2/4, lives to removal. It's a pretty okay vanilla 3-drop if needed if you don't have anything, first of all. Second of all, this deck isn't entirely face all the time. You sometimes make value trades. It's not like Face Hunter where you almost always go face, like 99% of the time. This one, it's only like 90% of the time, I'd say. So with the Death Speaker, the 10% of the time where you need to trade, or maybe a little bit more, it really, really helps because it allows your minions to not take damage. One Ironbeak Owl. Some decks don't even run any of them. Some decks run more than one. Some decks run two. I personally run one because I don't think it's super important. I've run 2 silences in decks before. If you've watched my Zoo Lock videos recently, I actually took out a silence because I just wasn't playing against enough matchups to warrant all of the silences. But one is still very good, and I actually won a game because I silenced a 0/3 egg, and the guy wasn't able to get 3 5/5s out of it. So it was pretty good. Like, silence is definitely important to have in the deck, so that's why I run one. Plague Scientist combo gives something poison. It's like a turn earlier Vile Spine Slayer. You play a 1-drop. This is ideally play a 1-drop. You dagger. Turn 3, you thug. Turn 4, what do? He now has a big minion out there because turn 4 against a druid, he gets a 3/6 taunt. But guess what? Your Firefly or your Dire Mole is still out there, the one that you put out in the beginning of the game. You play another 1-drop, assuming you have it, or if it's a Firefly, the one that you kept in your hand. You Plague Scientist the other one too, and you hit him. And then the thing dies because of poisonous, and that's a 4 mana without a coin Vile Spine Slayer. Obviously, on turn 4, if you had a coin Vile Spine Slayer, I'd recommend doing that. But if you don't have that, then that's a pretty good turn 4 removal. And the last thing that sets this deck apart is the Void Ripper. This is still, it's the same thing as what I did for my Odd Paladin deck. It really just helps against the Druid matchup because it's very popular and extremely strong against Spreading Plague because you could kill something with your weapon, kill something with all of your, like, 1/1s and stuff. Or not 1/1s, they would be like, actually, no. All of your things could just kill the 1 health minions is basically what I'm trying to get at. You can SI Agent to kill something just by pinging it after you Void Ripper. Because on his turn 6, you'll have 6 mana too. You Void Ripper, SI Agent, kill 1. Dagger, kill the other. And then you kill a couple more. And then you actually still have like 2 minions on the board after that. So honestly, it's Void Ripper is a very valuable card. And I've used it a couple of times to save my life. And you can use it to go a little bit more aggressive, like little drops like the 3/1. I mean, the 1/3 Dire Mole can become a 3/1. Things that get buffed up, like the Vile Spine Slayer, you can have an extra damage out of it. If you need to have a minion survive against a trade, you could Void Ripper. Void Ripper is just a pretty versatile card, and I really like it. So cards you can tech. So let's get into this real quick. Edwin Vancleef is not a necessary card. Just getting that out of the way right now. A lot of decks don't use him, and I'm going to go over some techs for him specifically because I really like the layout of the rest of this deck. Although, obviously, there are probably a couple more things you could do, and I'll get into that. First, you have Edwin Vancleef. Get rid of him if you don't have him. And, okay, if it's a cost, if the issue isn't a cost thing, it's just the way you don't, it's just that you don't like the feeling of Edwin in the deck. You can definitely play something like Captain Greenskin, the 5/4 for 5 that buffs your weapon +1/+1. It's very good. Your weapon is a huge part of your deck, and overall, it's just a very good card for this deck. It synergizes very well. Another card that you could put in, which I have been thinking about experimenting with, and you'll probably see it in this video where I actually try this out, is instead of having Edwin, put in Sprint. Now, the reason why I'm thinking about teching this in is because of the control matchups, especially Mage. Now, I'm going to get more into this in a second when I go over all of the matchups, but just a basic rundown. 7-mana spell that you could potentially pull means that there's a 20% chance that the Mage, when they do the Raven, they don't get that removal. And sometimes that last removal is super important. Like, sometimes you have game, or you're close to game, but you forgot, well, you didn't forget, but you know that they actually have another Flame Strike in their hand because they use the Raven, or they have another Blizzard, or a Meteor, or whatever. And this could potentially prevent that 20% of the time, which may not seem like a lot, but it's pretty helpful. And then when you run out of cards after all the removal, this refills your hand, and then you can start going on the offensive again after they've already used up a lot of removal on you. So overall, I think it could potentially be pretty good. And I know I said it would be a basic rundown, and I'm probably going to go over this later, but that's basically everything about that card and why I thought about teching it. Something else you could do is taking out... Actually, I don't know. This deck is pretty solid. If you want to do something cheaper by taking out Edwin, I'd recommend putting in another 1-drop or something, because honestly, you know, an Argent Squire would be pretty decent. And if you want to take out something else, like if you don't necessarily like the way that the Plague Scientist feels, or the Death Speaker, because I have some friends who ask me about the Death Speaker, is it really needed? And honestly, it's not. I like the Plague Scientist more than the Death Speaker, but the Death Speaker giving a minion immunity has come in handy a couple of times. But I think that the Plague Scientist poison removal's also really strong. But if you want to, you could take out Edwin for a 1-drop, like an Argent Squire, and then one of these guys out for a Argent Squire. Or you could take out Edwin for a Sprint or a Captain Greenhand, and then the Death Speaker, Plague Scientist for an Argent Squire. Because the Divine Shield, if you give it Cold Blood, can actually be really, really useful, especially if they don't have the removal to deal with it right away. And those are the main things that I would recommend changing about this deck. Some people, if you don't have Leroy Jenkins, you can trade him out for a 1-drop or something. Or put in another Kobold Scalebane so you have another like later game 5-drop. But I wouldn't recommend that, because you already have the Vilespine Slayer and the Fungal Mancer. You really need more minions to pump things up with and get a better board presence with. So if you take out Leroy, honestly, just go with a 1-drop. Maybe a Wolf Rider, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, if you want to have like that charge, a little bit of extra kill pressure, Wolf Rider into Cold Blood is still like a 7 damage surprise damage play. But honestly, might not recommend that. But if you want to experiment with it and you're going to go a more budget version of this deck with only the Baku being your legendary, Wolf Rider could potentially be pretty decent too. So now is the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going into all of the matchups. Oh boy, oh boy. So when playing against Druid, this deck is 3-2 against Druid. And this matchup is pretty alright in my opinion. I don't think that it's actually favored. I think it's more of a 50-50 matchup, and if I played a couple more, it would probably go to be like 5-5 or whatever. And the reason why I say this is because you do have a Silence and some Assassinates. Well, no, not Assassinates. Vilespine Slayers and the Poisonous to deal with the initial taunts. But if you aren't able to get a hold of the game right away, their ramp will just outpace you. So if you have a good starting hand and you're able to get the Thug, very possible that you win the game. If you don't, it's very possible that you can't kill him fast enough and then he wins the game, unless you can kill or silence a taunt and kill him with Leroy as a surprise move. But like if he gets a ton of armor, or if he gets Malfurion, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you. And those are the matchups that I generally lose. How you play this matchup is basically it's going to be the same for every single matchup. So this mulligan is basically the same into most matchups. And I'll talk about a couple more in the future, but for this one, standard what you want is an ideal 1-drop. Not necessarily the deckhand, but if you have the deckhand, it's not the worst thing in the world. Actually, no, don't go deckhand. If don't play the deckhand turn 1. You want a Dire Mole or a Firefly into turn 2 Dagger, so the second card doesn't really matter. And then the third card should be Thug. And if you want for another card in your hand, honestly, against a lot of matchups, I might keep Vilespine Slayer just because of the fact that he's just hard removal. Or the SI Agent, Vicious Fledgling. A lot of the 3-drops I would keep, honestly. I would not keep Plague Scientist because he's better later game when you trade into something. And if you draw him, he's useful, but he doesn't have the tempo that a lot of the other 3-drops have that you need to keep. And like, if you're in a position where you need Plague Scientist, like he's in there because he helps, but if you're in a position where you need him, you're in a bad situation as it is, if that makes sense. Like if you're in the position where you need him, you're not you're not in a winning position right now anyway. He's more of a way to get back the potential winning position. So honestly, most 3-drops fill that second card slot, that last card slot. But what you really want is a Dire Mole or Firefly, and then the Thug. Those are just the ideal. If you have the coin, no. If you have the coin, if you're going second, SI Agent, Vilespine Slayer are also valid to keep. Because of how efficient they are with the coin and comboing. Next matchup is Hunter. This matchup is 7-3. I've played against a lot of Hunters actually recently, and this deck I think beats it. I think that with your weapon, you can test out secrets against Secret Hunter. You get enough tempo with your stuff that by the time they get a Spellstone, assuming they're going Spellstone, you have pretty decent board control, at least a 4/4 on the board, if not a 5/5, and a weapon. You have, let's see here, trying to think of what else is Death Rattle Hunter. Against that, that's where the silence really comes in handy. If you draw the silence and if you can silence his egg, good for you. If you have a way of killing the egg, you have to kill the egg as soon as possible so you can only get 1/5/5 out of it. And then after that, you can start getting real value out of your deck. Ooh, I kicked my desk. Ow. Anyway, that's not important. Basically, in this one, you need to deal with the eggs as soon as possible, whether it be kill it or silence it, and then after that, you could play the game fairly standardly. And if you can't deal with the egg in like one turn, then he'll pop off and get 5/5s and you lose. That's how I lose these matchups. Or he gets 4 3/3 wolves. Like I can deal with 2 wolves. I can maybe deal with 3, but if he gets that 4 wolf spellstone, oh, I can't win. Next is Mage. Screw that class. Every single time that I lose, it is against the big spell Mage. Basically, this is one of the reasons I want to put in Sprint. They have so much removal and you have no card draw that you just eventually run out of fuel before they do because they have Ravens to draw. And they just have so much removal. And they'll just wait until you play 2 cards. And if you play 2 cards and then they remove 2, they're getting value out of each one of those. So really, there's no winning against this matchup. I'm 0-4. I can't do it. Paladin. Against this matchup, and if you're playing against this matchup a lot, and if you wanted to remove like a 3-drop for something else, or if you wanted to put in another 3-drop, one of the valid things that you could put in is a Tar Creeper if you really want to, or a Stonehill Defender maybe. If you wanted to take out like, I don't know, the Death Speaker or Anduin, or I don't know what else. What else did I say you could take out? I don't think you should take out the Plague Scientist, but if you don't like the feel of it, you could take that out too. Put in like a Tar Creeper if you're playing against a lot of aggro like decks and wide boards like Paladin. It's really helpful. As for the matchup with Paladin, I've only played against it twice in 50 games. I have no idea why Odd Paladin is not super popular. I think it's still a top tier deck. And although I didn't have super success with it because a lot of decks beat it right now, if the super popular decks right now are Hunter and Rogue, rather than Druid, which is what it used to be, and Warlock, which no, actually Warlock's super popular too. This deck pops up like I don't know. That I'm going off topic real quick, but Paladin, I don't know why not a lot of people are playing it, but in this matchup, same basic deal. You want to keep the same basic hand, and in this one, the only difference in playstyle with this deck is that instead of going face with everything, only go face with the big minions, like a Thug or a Fledgling or, I don't know, Vilespine Slayer or Kobold. Actually, not even the Vilespine Slayer. With most of the other things that are like health efficient to trade into 1/1s, like Diamol and Vilespine Slayer and Firefly and I don't know, even Plague Scientist, because it's only 2 damage. You have to control those 1/1s. That's how you win, so he doesn't get a good level up off. Other than that, hope he doesn't get Tarim with the Stonehill Defender, and you'll probably be fine. Against Priest, this matchup is also 1/1. There are a lot of different Priest matchups. I actually don't know a lot about this. Priest is not in the meta right now. Same with Warrior. So I'm not even going to talk about Warrior or Priest all that much. Other than I'd just keep the general I would just keep the general mulligan and against both of them, since they're control decks, don't overcommit to the board too much. You know that they're going to probably Duskbreaker on turn 3, or Brawl, or have Warpath, or have the Blade, Blood Razor to wipe the board within Warrior's case. So don't super overcommit super early on. What you want to do, ideally, is play like a couple of minions, because they don't have as many removals as Mage does. So if you play conservatively and make them use removals on like 2 creatures, you might be able to stay in the game long enough to win. And I don't know. That's just how I've played both those matchups. And Priest is 1-1 and Warrior is 1-0. So like, if anything, I at least know how to go even with them and beat Warrior. Next deck is Rogue. This odd deck just beats Miracle Rogue with all the tempo you get, especially if you get a Thug. It's ridiculous. And then against the mirror match, it actually comes down to skill, in my opinion. Very much so. It's not just a straight 50-50. Well, it kind of is. That's how mirror match works. But it really, really comes down to skill. Because you could say, well, one person goes second, so they get the coin into like a Vilespine. But then the other person, if they don't have the Vilespine, the person who goes first is able to get the Thug out first and make it a 4-4. Which means that they can deal with their Thug more efficiently. Like, if I hit their 1-2, make my Thug a 5-5, trade into his 4-4 Thug, my 5-5 Thug will live, and his won't, and then you just get tempo that way. Comes down to RNG, but also a lot of skill in this matchup, so watch out for that one. I can't really give too many tips other than standard mulligan. Yeah, standard mulligan. And one last thing for the standard mulligan, a card that you could keep that I don't personally keep that much, but the Cold Blood or the Deadly Poison. If you think that it's going to be a more aggro deck, like Rogue, a Deadly Poison would be pretty good to kill a 4 health thing, because there are a decent amount of 4 health minions out there. And the Cold Blood is also good because either A, you use it to pop off something else's combo, or you can play something and give some other minion 4 extra attack to go face with, and it really puts a lot of tempo on the board. So into control matchups, that the third card slot, one of those two, super helpful. As if you're able to Cold Blood on like turn 4 on a Thug, then the only thing that beats is a polymorph. Is a polymorphed from Mage. Other than that, like if you pump something up, or I said that you almost always dagger, but let's say you have two cold bloods in your hand, or another 1-drop and a cold blood, and you want to just put pressure on the board because the person hasn't played anything. Making a 1-3 or a 1-2, a 5-3 or 5-2 on turn 2 is ridiculous, and no classes can deal with that turn 2. Really, none of the control classes can, because all of their control spells happen a little bit later. You could easily get 10, 15 extra damage out of that card if you play early. So into Priest and Warrior and Mage. Maybe not Druid as much, because you might need Cold Blood to help you kill a taunt. Against those 3, keeping Cold Blood is extremely helpful. And I'm sorry I didn't say this earlier, but I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the Rogue matchup, and how, I don't know, all of the cards that match up, and how you can be surprised with them. Odd Rogue being Leroyed, Cold-Blooded, and that RNG comes out in that matchup too. Cold Blood is just an extremely powerful card. Next matchup, which I am very surprised about. I'm very surprised that the matchup has been so much in my favor, but Shaman is 4-1. That's a bit weird, and I don't necessarily agree with it. I think that this matchup should be worse for me, and I think it's because I've played against 2 even Shamans, which I beat. And Rogue beats even Shaman. Your dagger can kill any of the totems that it needs to, if needed. You can pump it up and kill any of the 0-3 totems. you get a lot of board presence on the board before he can really do all that much, because he's going to be doing a totem and then probably the Murloc totem on turn 2. So really, you can, if you get out like an early minion, a turn 1 minion, and then turn 3 you get a 4/4 thug, it's so helpful. Also, just realized, one other thing that beats a cold-blooded minion is Hex from Shaman, but that only really counts in Shudderwalk, but that's the other thing. If you're playing against Warlock, the early Thunderstorm, Lightning Storm, so powerful, and I don't know why I've won this matchup the majority of the times. I honestly don't, but, you know, maybe Volcano and Lightning Storm just aren't enough to beat this odd deck. I don't know. You really got to watch out for Shaman, though. I really feel like this matchup should be worse, and I think I got lucky. Lightning Storm turn 3 is devastating, especially if they high roll on some of your minions, because on turn 3, I don't know, but if you have a Thug out, that's a little bit different. If you have the Thug out, then it's fine, but if you only have like a Fledgling or an SI agent or a Blink Fox and they high roll and kill it, then a lot of your tempo right there is just immediately gone. If they don't, though, and it's a 50-50 chance, you can maybe run away with the game, because next turn you can't do much. But, you know, that's Shudderwalk matchup is a lot harder, and I don't know why my win rate is 4-1 against it. Last one is Warlock. It's 4-5. I think this deck loses to even Warlock because they're able to get out taunts. No, wait. I actually don't know why this deck is so bad. No, I remember that a lot of these games are close, like really, really close. And I feel like this matchup should be a little bit in my favor. I feel like it beats even because you have silence, you have poison, you have like 3 hard removals, and a silence in this deck to deal with the minions that he buffs up. And then against Zoo, your dagger kills a lot of his 2 health minions. Like, there are a lot of 1 health and 2 health minions that the dagger can kill. I'm trying to think of how I can make this matchup better, and in this case, I don't know. I think there are a couple of times when I didn't trade into a minion with my dagger when I should have, because I didn't want to take the damage, but it just ended up leading to me taking more damage. So a tip against Warlock, if you're playing against Zoolock, trade into those 2 health minions if you can, because first of all, I know I lost one game because I didn't trade into a Light Warden, and he pumped it up to become a 5/2, and so I took 5 damage, and then I traded into it next turn and killed it, and that ended up making me take 9 more damage than I should have if I had just traded into it the turn I could have, and I lost that game. And I don't know, I feel like I could have won that game if I hadn't made that misplay, because I really started getting more pressure on board. I remember it came down to a Leroy Jenkins. I don't remember if it was a top deck. No, it definitely was a top deck. Why wouldn't he have done it earlier if it wasn't? Anyway, trade in the minions against the Zoolock deck. It's very helpful. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. This one was a little bit longer, but I really liked this deck, and I was very passionate about it. I don't know. I loved Spell Hunter, but this deck is probably like my second favorite deck. Honestly, like, I had such a blast playing it, and low key, I may not even. No, I'm definitely gonna play another deck, and it's probably gonna be Token Druid for the next week, and I'm gonna do a review on that at the end of that week. But I'm just absolutely in love with this deck, and on the Saturdays, which is the day that I make these guides and stuff, I'm probably gonna just grind this deck out a little bit and see if I could get to rank 5. I don't know. I just absolutely love this deck, and I would recommend it. It's not too expensive. You need Baku. Leroy's important, but not needed, and Edwin is definitely not needed. You could definitely run this deck with only 1 legendary. Although, Leroy is a card that I would recommend crafting just in general, so if you have him, craft him too. This video has gotten very long. I ranted a lot, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed, and I really try to go as in-depth as possible. And sometimes I forget things, and then I revisit them a little bit later, and it makes the video take longer. I'll try to. I don't know if you guys like the ranty style of this video, and if you do, go ahead and tell me. But if you would like it to be a little more organized, rather than just 3 parts, and then each part I rant about for a while, I'll try to be a little bit better about that. But I don't know. When I rant, I tend to hit more things than if I script something, because if I script something, I'm like, well, just hit this, and then ABC, each under each part, and then I'm done. But this one, I rant, and I don't know, I just get a lot of information across. Just like right now, I'm getting a lot of information across, even though it's taking longer than it should have. Anyway, this is 25 minutes. I'm sorry for taking up all your time. I hope you enjoyed. See ya.